Geometric rain. Alan Chen squatted down in the muddy soil, wiping the raindrops from his glasses with a quick, frustrated motion. He looked again, blinking in disbelief. The rain wasn't just falling in random splatters across the forest floor. It was forming shapes. Perfect shapes. What is this? He muttered under his breath, feeling an unease crawl over him. The forest was still just a soft patter of rain on leaves and the distant echo of birdsong. But where the rain hit the earth in front of him, it left behind marks, lines, circles and spirals. It was as if the drops themselves were following some kind of geometric rule, something precise and unnatural. He took out his phone, filming a few seconds as the drops continued to create patterns with almost mathematical accuracy. His mind scrambled for explanations, strange winds, low pressure, or maybe something to do with the Earth's magnetic field in this area. But none of it made sense. Alan didn't want to admit it, but this sight made him feel small, insignificant. Then he thought of his team, each as strange and restless as he was. They'd know what to make of this, or at least add some ideas he hadn't considered. He fumbled with his phone, sending a hasty message. "Got something big. Meet me out here as soon as you can." An hour later, Maya, Sofia, and Leo stepped out of their truck, making their way through the dense underbrush toward Alan. Maya, the youngest, moved ahead with her camera, her footsteps soft and careful. The rain had stopped, leaving the forest coated in a damp mist that clung to everything. "Alan!" Maya called, her voice muffled by the trees. "Over here!" Alan replied, waving them closer. His face was intense, eyebrows knit in concentration. Maya squatted down beside him, her eyes widening as she took in the patterns etched into the earth. She ran a hand through her hair, a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. This is incredible," she whispered. "I've never seen anything like it." Sofia, ever the physicist, knelt down and traced one of the circles with her finger. "They're nearly perfect, almost like someone printed them here," she murmured, a frown forming. "But there's no sign of disturbance. These shapes were formed naturally." Leo, who was both the quietest and most sceptical of the group, hung back, watching. His gaze was thoughtful, though his posture stayed tense, wary. "You think nature made these?" he said, voice low. "Patterns don't just form like this. This feels off." Alan nodded, though he kept his eyes on the patterns. "I don't know. That's what we're here to figure out." Maya clicked her camera and snapped a few pictures, crouching down to get a closer view. "You think it has to do with magnetic fields? Or maybe a rare pressure pattern?" she asked, her voice filled with curiosity. "Maybe," Alan muttered, distracted. "I mean, this isn't the first time people have seen strange things in the rain. There are old records, ancient ones, that talk about unusual weather phenomena, but those were always considered myths, stories, and no one took them seriously." Sofia looked up, eyebrow raised. "What kind of stories?" Alan paused, glancing at the ground as though reluctant to answer. "Well, some ancient civilizations believed that certain rain patterns were warnings, a sign of things to come, that these patterns meant something." Leo snorted, folding his arms across his chest. "Warnings? Like from the earth itself?" Alan shrugged. "Who knows? But look, there's no harm in investigating." Leo shook his head. "People used to believe everything was a sign. Stars, clouds, bird flights." He stopped, sighing. "But rain?" Maya ignored Leo, her gaze fixed on the patterns. "Well, whatever this is, it's beautiful. These shapes, when I look at them, they almost feel familiar. I can feel them in colours too." She stopped, realising everyone was watching her. "Sorry, it's probably my synesthesia kicking in." Sofia tilted her head, curious. Synesthesia? How does that work? Maya shrugged, a little embarrassed. I see colours and shapes when I hear sounds or see certain things. It's hard to explain, but these patterns, I don't know, they feel like I can almost see their music. Alan straightened up, looking at her thoughtfully. That's interesting. It could give us an edge, help us look at this from a different angle. Leo frowned, kicking at a loose clump of moss. Great, so we're supposed to believe the forest is trying to communicate with us through geometry. His tone was sceptical, but he sounded uneasy. Maya hesitated. It's not like that, it's more like something's nudging us, like we're part of a larger pattern. Alan tapped his notebook, as if lost in thought. Larger pattern, he murmured. Maybe there's something bigger going on here. Just then, his phone buzzed. He glanced down at the screen, eyebrows shooting up. Maya, look at this. He handed her the phone and she gasped. It was an old document she'd scanned earlier, something she'd stumbled upon while researching ancient weather records. The page showed sketches of rain patterns almost identical to what they'd found in the forest. Circles, spirals, even lines connecting them, similar to a map or code. Where did you find this? Sofia asked, leaning over to get a closer look. Maya shrugged, barely able to contain her excitement. I dug around in some archives, just out of curiosity. The document was part of a collection on ancient civilizations. It mentioned these rain patterns showing up before big events, changes, sometimes disasters. Leo's expression darkened. And you don't think that's a warning? Maya looked uncertain. I don't know, but whatever it is, it's not just random. These patterns mean something. Sofia let out a slow breath. So what do we do now? Alan stood staring out into the mist-covered trees, his mind working furiously. We keep looking. We need to see if this phenomenon spreads or if it's isolated to this spot. And we document everything. As the days passed, the team noticed strange things. Not only were the patterns becoming more complex, but they also seemed to be evolving. On the third day, Maya called them over with a trembling voice. It's counting down, she whispered, her face pale as she traced the shapes with her finger. These shapes, they're forming a sequence, a countdown. Alan's heart skipped a beat. Countdown to what? Maya swallowed, shaking her head. I don't know, but it's like every day the pattern resets, each time with fewer shapes, almost as if it's leading to something. Leo's jaw tightened, his mind racing. If it's counting down, we don't have much time. Alan nodded, a sense of urgency filling him. He glanced at each of his team members, their faces a mix of fear and determination. Then let's find out what it's leading to. As they continued their research, tension grew within the group. Alan's doubts clashed with his curiosity, Maya's intuition with Leo's caution. They were racing against something they didn't understand, with only 7 days left on an unknown clock. But even as they worked, the patterns grew stranger, more demanding, as though the forest itself was urging them on, its ancient secrets hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to finally listen. The second night was eerily quiet, with only the rustle of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot breaking the silence. Alan and Sofia were hunched over their laptops, while Leo and Maya stood nearby, watching the patterns form under the pale light of their lanterns. The rain had left behind perfect geometric shapes on the forest floor again, stretching out in faint, impossibly precise lines. Alan cleared his throat. We're not just looking at rain patterns anymore, it's spreading, he said, barely above a whisper. What do you mean? Leo asked, his brows knitting. Alan nodded toward his screen where images of tree growth rings, meticulously mapped animal migration paths, and global wind currents were displayed. Each was overlaid with the rain's symmetrical design, forming an unsettling, intricate web. "These patterns are cropping up everywhere," he said, shaking his head. "The data suggests it's all linked. The natural world, the technology we're using, even our quantum systems. Everything." "Wait, even our tech?" Maya looked up, her face a mixture of surprise and unease. Sofia nodded, her face illuminated by the screen's glow. "Alan's right. Look at this," she said, pointing to a digital map of AI systems and quantum computer networks worldwide. "They're somehow aligning with these patterns, as if we've been replicating this design without even realizing it." Leo took a deep breath, glancing around at the forest as though it too was part of the silent, watching presence. "So, everything's just syncing up with this countdown?" "Seems so," Sofia said, her voice flat but trembling at the edges. "Like humanity's creations are following an ancient template." The silence that followed felt heavier than before, each of them staring at the web of connections on the screen. That night, Alan tossed in his sleeping bag, his eyes open and staring into the darkness. Sleep had become a fleeting thing, slipping through his fingers night after night as his mind churned with images of the rain patterns, of the lives ruined by his scandal, of the whispered accusations that had followed him for years. Every failure, every sleepless night seemed to haunt him anew as the countdown ticked onward. Maya, too, was struggling. Her synesthesia had intensified, and she was beginning to see the patterns not just in the rain or the trees, but in flashes of colour, sounds, even the faint hum of her own heartbeat. The world around her felt woven into a single, interconnected rhythm, but the more she tried to explain it, the more her words sounded unhinged, even to herself. Sofia, meanwhile, found herself sinking into obsessive theorizing. Vindicated by the patterns, she felt more driven than ever, haunted by memories of ridicule, of colleagues laughing at her cosmic nonsense. She scoured every inch of data she could find, convinced the universe was finally handing her proof of something much bigger than human understanding. And then there was Leo. Caught between his scientific mind and his grandmother's warnings about the rhythms of earth and sky, he felt himself stretched thin. His grandmother's voice seemed to echo through his thoughts, growing louder each night. The countdown, she warned, was something humanity was not meant to disturb. The next day, the team received an unexpected visit. 2 government agents appeared, along with a representative from Sentient Core, a massive tech conglomerate. They claimed to be there to support the team's research efforts, but their true intentions quickly became clear. One of the agents, a tall, unsmiling man in a dark suit, crossed his arms. "Mr. Chen, you and your team are gathering critical data that may have far-reaching implications. We're here to ensure it's handled appropriately." Alan frowned, exchanging a look with Leo and Sofia. "We've managed so far without any help," he replied, his tone guarded. The Sentient Core representative, a woman with sharp eyes, took a step closer. "You don't understand. This isn't just about science. If these patterns have the potential to influence, let's say, neural networks, we can't ignore the possibilities. There are applications to consider." "Applications?" Maya asked, her voice incredulous. "This isn't some tech experiment. It's nature. It's beyond us." The agent's gaze hardened. "Regardless, we have an interest in these findings. You're gathering data on US soil, and the government has the right to take possession if necessary." Leo gritted his teeth, feeling a surge of anger. "So that's why you're here, not to help, but to take control." Alan shot a glance at Maya, a silent warning to stay quiet, but Maya's fury was evident. She clenched her fists, defiant. "This isn't yours to take," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. That night, as they gathered around the equipment, the team felt a rift growing between them. Maya's gaze shifted between Alan and the sentient core representatives, suspicion growing in her eyes. She could see the toll the countdown was taking on all of them, but something inside her warned against interference. There was something sacred, something raw and untampered about these patterns, a primal power that seemed to demand respect rather than control. In the early hours, Maya crept out of her tent, sneaking over to the containment device the agents had set up. Her heart raced as she unscrewed a panel, disabling the device's main circuitry. She knew she was risking everything, but her instincts told her she couldn't let them interfere. As she turned to leave, she was met with Alan's furious glare, his face a mix of shock and anger. "What are you doing?" he hissed, grabbing her arm. "You're risking everything, our lives, our careers." "You don't understand, Alan," Maya replied, yanking her arm free. "This is bigger than us. We have no right to tamper with it." Alan's voice was cold. "You think you're protecting something? You're just a kid, an intern. You don't know what's at stake." "Maybe I don't," she retorted, her eyes blazing, "but maybe neither do you." They stood in tense silence, each daring the other to back down. But it was Maya who finally turned, walking away with a defiance that left Alan standing alone, shaken by her words. The days passed, tension building as the countdown ticked closer to 0. Late one night, Sofia stared up at the sky, her gaze fixed on the stars. She felt a chill as she realized something uncanny. The constellations above mirrored the rain's geometry, each alignment tracing a familiar, intricate pattern. She woke the others, her voice trembling as she showed them her discovery. "Do you see it?" she whispered, pointing to the night sky. "The rain, the stars, it's all connected. This isn't just about Earth." Leo's face paled. "Are you saying these patterns, they're not just here? They're everywhere?" Sofia nodded, the enormity of her revelation dawning on her. "It's like a message, an ancient code, something beyond us, watching, guiding, or maybe warning." As the team stared up at the sky, each felt a weight settle over them, a profound, almost crushing realization that they were not alone. They were small parts in a vast, incomprehensible web, connected to forces far greater than anything they had ever imagined. Alan looked around at his team, his voice barely a whisper. "What are we really dealing with here?" No one answered. They simply stared at the sky, knowing that whatever was coming, they were powerless to stop it. The forest was silent, save for the team's hurried whispers and the subtle rustling of leaves in the early dawn light. Alan, nerves frayed, adjusted the last of the interference devices with shaking hands. Beside him, Maya watched, tense and disapproving. "We can't just sit here and do nothing, Maya," Alan said, his voice clipped. "You don't understand what could happen if we let this, whatever it is, finish." Maya's gaze was steady. "And you don't understand what might happen if we interfere," she replied. "It's not ours to control." The countdown had mere hours left, and the strange patterns seemed to pulse more vividly now, alive with a frequency that all of them could feel humming beneath their skin. Maya took a deep breath, trying to ground herself. She felt the connection, sensed something vast and ancient in its design, a rhythm she felt reluctant to disrupt. Sofia stood a few feet away, her face lit by the faint glow of her screen. "It's not about control, it's about curiosity," she said, glancing at both Alan and Maya. "There's knowledge here, something we may never see again if we let it pass." Leo's face was set in lines of quiet resolve. "My grandmother warned me about this kind of power," he murmured almost to himself. She used to say there are forces you don't touch unless you're prepared for the cost. Alan scoffed, exasperated. This isn't about myths or cautionary tales. It's about what's real, what's right in front of us. But Maya stepped forward, her hand on Alan's shoulder. This countdown isn't meant for us to disrupt. Can't you feel it, Alan? We're a part of something larger, and sometimes being a part of it means standing back. The final minutes ticked down, and the team stood in a tense circle, each of them bound by their own beliefs, their own fears. Alan took a deep breath, torn between the scientist in him who demanded answers and the human who felt he was standing at the precipice of something he couldn't fully grasp. He looked at the others, seeing the doubt and resolve mirrored in each face. "Fine," he muttered, stepping back from the interference device. "But I'm not going to like it." A stillness settled over the forest as the countdown ticked its final seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. For a moment there was nothing but silence, deep and complete, as though the forest itself held its breath. Then a subtle shift ran through the earth, a low hum that rose, swelling through the air and resonating with every part of the ecosystem around them. Birds stilled mid-flight, trees tilted toward the same direction as though drawn by an invisible force, and animals crept out from their hiding spots, moving in harmony with one another. Even the wind changed, spiraling around them in deliberate currents that formed shapes eerily reminiscent of the geometric rain. Sofia looked up at the treetops, her eyes wide with wonder and fear. "It's aligning," she whispered, as if afraid to disturb the balance. The entire ecosystem pulsed, a beat that echoed through every leaf, every drop of moisture, every breath they took. Maya felt her heart race, not with fear, but with something closer to awe, a sense of being wrapped within a consciousness that transcended her understanding. She closed her eyes, feeling the hum synchronize with her heartbeat, each beat feeling like it resonated with a vast intelligence. Sophia's voice cracked as she reached for the others, trying to find words. "It's like the forest knows us, is seeing us as parts of itself." For the team, it was as though they were momentarily fused with the natural world, each of them a part of this rhythmic pulse that seemed to stretch beyond Earth itself. Time lost meaning, and they felt themselves expand, becoming threads in an intricate tapestry that extended far beyond anything human. And then, as quickly as it had begun, it was over. The forest fell silent again, the animals scattered, and the wind returned to its usual, directionless wandering. Hours later, government agents swept through the site, their presence an abrupt return to the harsh reality of containment and control. They seized every data point, every recording, every piece of evidence the team had gathered. Alan watched as men and women in dark suits packed away his life's work, sealing it away in cold metallic cases without so much as a word. One agent handed Alan a confidentiality agreement, his tone devoid of emotion. "You'll sign here," he said, a pen held out. Alan looked at the pen and then at the faces around him. The disbelief, the awe, the reluctant acceptance, it was all fading, crushed under the weight of bureaucracy and secrecy. Numbly he took the pen and signed, knowing that he would never be able to speak of what he had seen. He would carry it alone, haunted by the memory of something he could not explain, something he had almost dared to understand. Days passed, and each member of the team went their separate ways, carrying with them fractured memories of that brief cosmic alignment. Alan, his hope shattered, withdrew from the scientific community, unable to shake the feeling that he had been silenced not only by the government, but by the very mystery he had hoped to unravel. Sofia published in niche journals, desperate to keep the memory alive, clinging to whatever fragments she could. Leo returned to his grandmother's stories, realizing now that her words were the closest thing he'd ever have to answers. Maya alone seemed to find solace. Standing alone under a starry sky, she gazed up, her synesthesia allowing her to see familiar geometric patterns in the constellations, like echoes of the rain that had started it all. She felt an immense presence, something so vast and intelligent it defied comprehension. She took a deep breath, knowing now that what they had seen was no accident, no fluke of nature. It was a message, perhaps, or a reminder. It was the world reminding itself of its own balance, its own cycle, recurring with the regularity of a heartbeat. A year later, Maya sat alone, flipping through her notes, fingers tracing over faded equations and sketches. The memory of the countdown had faded in the public eye, but she felt it lingering within her. There was one detail she could not shake, something she had only begun to understand in the final days. The countdown, she realized, was not the end. It was part of something far larger, a pulse that beat across centuries and millennia. Looking at the night sky, she traced a constellation, recognizing the geometry once more. And with a quiet certainty she understood. The countdown was not a single event, but a sequence, something infinite, repeating through the ages. Maya let the thought settle, a mixture of fear and wonder blossoming within her. Somewhere, out there, in the far reaches of the universe, the patterns would continue, pulsing with a rhythm beyond human understanding. She felt both infinitesimal and connected, a single thread in the infinite tapestry of existence. As she closed her eyes, a final image floated before her mind, of the rain, the stars, and the quiet hum of something vast and alive, a cosmic intelligence that moved with both indifference and grace. The countdown had ended, but the pattern persisted, beating on.